So today we're going to dive into a really powerful passage from the Quran, Surah Al-Baqara, verses 104 to 110. Now this isn't just some ancient text. Think of it more like a strategic guide, a divine roadmap given to a brand new community that was facing all kinds of intense pressure. Let's explore how these words gave them the tools they needed to build resilience and strength.
And really, this whole passage boils down to one big question. How does a new community survive psychological warfare? You see, the early Muslims in Medina weren't just dealing with physical threats. They were up against this quiet war, a campaign of subtle attacks on their morale, their prophet, and their faith itself. These verses are like the playbook God sent down, offering strategies for survival that are, frankly, timeless.
So where does it all start? Well, you'd be surprised. The first challenge the Quran addresses is incredibly subtle. The battle doesn't begin with a sword, it begins with a single word, a linguistic attack aimed with surgical precision.
And this is where the Quran steps in, with this incredibly specific instruction. As you can see, it says, "O you who have believed, say not Râinâ, but say Unzurnâ, and listen." Now, on the surface, this might just look like a small vocabulary change, but the story behind it reveals something so much deeper.
Okay, so here's the clever manipulation that was going on. The word Râinâ in Arabic is perfectly innocent. It just means tend to us or look after us. But, and here's the twist, critics in Medina were cleverly twisting the pronunciation so it sounded like a Hebrew insult. So God steps in and says, nope, stop using that word, switch to Unzurnâ. It means look upon us, and it carried the same respectful intent, but without any double meaning that could be twisted and weaponized against them.
So what's the big lesson from this one verse? It's that a community's first line of defense is just being aware. It's a lesson to be conscious of language, to choose words that are clear, direct, and respectful, and to avoid anything ambiguous that can be exploited by people who want to cause trouble. It's really a masterclass in protecting yourself through communication.
Okay, so we've seen how they were being attacked, with words. But the Quran goes deeper. It asks the next logical question. Why? Why was there so much hostility to begin with? What was really driving all of this? And wow, this next verse, it doesn't pull any punches. It gets right to the core of the problem. It reveals that many from the other established communities simply did not want to see any good, any new revelation come down to the Muslims. This wasn't just some intellectual disagreement. This was something much deeper, much more emotional.
And the Quran gives this feeling a name, a very specific diagnosis, hasad, which is envy. The conflict, it explains, wasn't really about ideas or theology. It was about an emotion, a deep resentment that God's favor, that prophecy itself, had been given to someone outside of their own people, their own lineage.
And then verse 109 just lays it all out there. It says their desire to turn believers back to disbelief comes out of envy from themselves, even after they knew the truth. But look at the response God prescribes. It's not fight back. It's pardon and overlook. This was a strategic move, a call for disciplined patience to maintain the moral high ground and keep the community stable while it was still growing.
So after unmasking the why, that deep-seated envy, the Quran moves on to the next phase of the attack. The critics shifted their tactics. They moved from social jabs to a full-on theological assault, designed to shake the very foundations of the believer's faith.
And their question was a really sharp one, designed to plant a seed of doubt. They asked, hey, if this book is from a perfect, all-knowing God, why would he change the rules? Why would one verse get replaced by another? Doesn't that sound like a contradiction?
But the Quran doesn't shy away from this at all. It confronts it head-on, introducing a really important theological idea. This verse explains that whenever a rule is abrogated or replaced, it's always replaced with something better than it or similar to it. This isn't a sign that God is changing his mind. It's a sign of his wisdom and his tailored approach to education.
This principle is known as nasikh, or abrogation. And you know, the Quran presents it as a feature, not a bug. Think of it like a master teacher guiding a student. You don't give a first grader a calculus textbook, right? You adapt the lesson as the student grows and matures. Nasikh is God's way of tailoring his guidance for a community that was itself growing and evolving.
So, what gives God the right to change the rules? What's the ultimate trump card in this argument? This next verse lays it out with absolute clarity. It reminds the believers of one fundamental, undeniable truth. God is in charge of everything.
The logic here is just crystal clear and powerful. First, God has absolute sovereignty over the heavens and the earth, the whole shebang. So, step 2, that means he, and only he, gets to make the rules, and change them if he wants, which leads to the final point. Abrogation isn't a contradiction, it's simply an expression of God's absolute authority and wisdom. It's a final word on the matter.
All right, so after dismantling all these external attacks, the linguistic ones, the emotional ones, the theological ones, the Quran does something brilliant. It pivots. It says, okay, enough playing defense, let's talk offense. Here's your action plan for building a community that's basically unbreakable from the inside out.
But first, there's a really important warning. This verse basically says, hey, be careful. Don't fall into the same trap that other communities did, specifically pointing to the people of Moses who exhausted their prophet with endless, stubborn questions. The message is clear. Don't get bogged down in arguments that just weaken your faith.
The key takeaway here is to make a conscious shift. Move away from a mindset of suspicion and endless questioning, and move towards a mindset of submission and constructive action. The goal is to avoid those intellectual rabbit holes that just drain your energy, and instead, channel that energy into building something real.
And that brings us to the grand finale, the last verse in this section. This is the ultimate two-step action plan. It's so simple, but so profound. Establish prayer and give zakah, or charity. This is the positive, forward-looking path. Instead of getting tangled up in negativity, you focus on this.
You can think of this as the blueprint for the believer's fortress. The attacks are going to come, sure. But instead of just patching up holes, you're building something strong from the inside. You build that vertical connection to God through prayer, and you build those horizontal connections to your community through charity. The ultimate response, the ultimate strategy is to build, not just debate.
And that really leaves us with a question, doesn't it? I mean, this guidance came down over 1,400 years ago, but it sounds like it could have been written yesterday. So for us, right here, right now, in our own age of nonstop distraction, negativity, and debate, what is the fortress that we should be building for ourselves?